A number of years ago, he said, I got into an accident with some of the farm machinery. And he said, I just left it go and didn't get it treated. And he said infection got in. And by the time I realized how severe it was, my dad said, can't you get out of bed and get out to the fields this morning? And he said, Pa, he said, I can't get my leg going. He said, it's swollen up. His dad looked and he said, oh my word, why haven't you said anything? He says, well, I didn't want to bother you. And he said, we got to get you down to the doctor. So he put him in the horse and buggy deal, put him in the buggy and hauled him down to the country doctor. And the doctor looked at his leg and said to the father, he said, oh, we're so far out here. He said, I don't know hardly. He said, we can't get him to a hospital. He said, can you hold him down? He says, I'll give him some alcohol or something. We got to cut the leg off just below the hip. He says, gangrene is set in there. And the father said, cut it off? And the boy said, you're never cutting that leg off. And the doc says, well, I'm saying it's being cut off. And the father said, well, if my kid says it's not going to be cut off, you're not going to cut it off. And he says, well, the boy will die then. The boy says, okay. And so the father put him in the buggy and started back. And the father said, you know, he said, I just thought, there's an old herb doctor down here. Let's go see him. And they went down, and this old herb doctor looked at the leg, and he says, let's get at it. And he took him out in the field, and he says, see all these marshmallow plants? He says, start pulling them, root and all. Let's get them going. And they got a big 50-gallon drum. And they put the hose in and filled it with water and heated it up. And they started putting marshmallow plants in there. They put the whole plant in, mashed them down. And then they would drain off gallons of the water and soak this fellow's leg in it. And they soaked it 24 hours a day. They would let him doze at night, but they just kept changing. Now the principle on gangrene, and this is one we have used in recommending it in hospitals and various other places, is 30 minutes hot tea with cayenne in it. Now for each container that's large enough to put a leg or an arm in, you will put a tablespoon to an ounce of cayenne in it. You leave the gangrenous area in for 30 minutes hot. You throw that tea away, you don't reheat it. Now this is one thing I please hope you will remember. Don't use it over and over, because our value has gone out the first time in the majority of cases. So you throw out the chickweed tea and the chickweed, marshmallow, pardon me, and the next thing that you do is take cold water, tap water, or as cold as they can take without putting a chill into them, and soak the area in cold water for 5 minutes. Throw that out and put another bucket of tea or condition of 30 minutes of tea over the entire area. And continue 30 minutes, 5 minutes, 30 minutes, 5 minutes. After a period of time, the pain will be out. If you could start in the morning, by evening, the pain will be out so that you could put fomentations over the leg. Now, if you know anything about gangrene, you'll know that it's death in the specific area. And the flesh is dying, and it cannot stand the weight of even a sheet on it, because the pain is so excruciatingly bad that it's enough to make people scream. We have been through many cases of this, and we know. This young fellow had his leg soaked until evening, and then they fomented it and started soaking the next day. And he pulled up his pants leg, the grandfather did, And he said, "You see that leg, boy?" And the boy said, "Yes." And he says, "Praise the Lord, that leg is there." He says, "That herb doctor and the marshmallow," he said, "saved it." Now, don't you ever forget what marshmallow looks like. Well, you know, that was one of the most impressive talks I had ever heard from one of my herbalist students. I have said that 4% of what I have learned in life comes from the schoolroom. 96% has come because the good Lord has steered in patients and students that teach me. And this was one of them.
You put the tablespoon of cayenne in with the herb tea?
In with the tea, yes. It's put right in the tea.
In a situation where there'd be phlebitis, and you'd be using the white oak bark, but there's also gangrene, would you soak that, or would you just make a fermentation of the marshmallow?
I'd soak it.
You would soak it.
Wherever you have a gangrenous condition, it's interesting enough and dangerous enough that we don't play, we soak.
Could you put white oak bark in with the marshmallow, or just wait on that?
I would wait. I would wait and do the marshmallow alone. It's like Greta Garbo, "I want to be alone."
You'd take care of that first then.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you.
Do you drink the tea with the cayenne in it also?
Oh, definitely. Anytime I prescribe teas, yes, take them orally also. Now, this condition of gangrene, you know, sometimes people are so grateful when they've had a condition cleared. I was up in the cutest little old-fashioned church up in Seattle lecturing, and they had, I was, as I was talking, down the ramp, they wheeled a wheelchair, and they left the wheelchair down close to where my podium was. It was a pulpit, but now I was using it as a podium. And this gentleman that was in it was being pushed down. He sat there and listened. And when we got through, he called me down from the podium, and he said, "You notice I have my legs covered with a lap cloth?" And I said, "Yes." He says, "I have gangrene in both feet." And he said, this was war years. And he said, "The hospital rooms are so scarce that they cannot operate on me until next Wednesday." This was on a Friday. And he said they are afraid that the gangrene will be up to the hips, and they will have to amputate just below the hips, both legs. He said, "I am the president of the Spiritualist Association for the Northwest." And he said, "I don't want to lose these legs. I've heard that you've helped others. Can you help me?" I said, "Yes." So I took the young man that was pushing him in the wheelchair out into the parking lot. And the good Lord was kind enough to have alfalfa coming up all through the gravel in the parking lot. And I said, "Now you know what this is?" And the young fellow said, "Yes, yes, we've got it all over the place." I said, "All right." And I told him how to gather the root and the herb as a whole, and to make it into tea, and to take 5-gallon cans, cut the tops out, and soak this man's legs, both legs, in. And it was 30 minutes, 5 minutes, 30 minutes, 5 minutes, as I've told you before, using the cayenne. And and so the old gentleman thanked me when we came back in and left. I was there 1 month later for another series of lectures. And as I stood up at the pulpit or podium to start my lecture, the door opened and an elderly man came running down the down the ramp. He says, "Hey, could you wait just a minute? I want to say something before you start." And I thought maybe someone left the lights on out in the parking lot or something, and I said, "Yes." And he turned to the audience and he said, "A month ago I was here. You folks won't recognize me. I was in a wheelchair with a blanket over my legs." He said, "I had gangrene in both legs." And he said, "This man here took my young fellow out that was helping me come in here and showed him one of God's precious herbs and told us how to use it." And he said, "This was on a Friday. We used it Friday and Friday night, started with Saturday morning after we got back. And we used it Saturday and Sunday and Monday and Tuesday, the poultices alone, and Wednesday, instead of being wheeled into the hospital to have my legs amputated at the hips, I walked in and stamped both feet on the on the pavement, and I said, 'These are my legs, and they're going to stay on. You don't need to have that room for me. You can put someone else in it.'" And he was, tears running down his cheeks as he walked out. You know, Marshmallow is great. Don't sell it short. Now, he was very grateful, very grateful. But I got to take a minute and tell another one where the condition changes. Up in...
Is that alfalfa or marshmallow?
That's Marshmallow.
That was marshmallow. The alfalfa was made.
I'm sorry. It's too early in the morning.
You meant marshmallow.
Marshmallow.
Okay.
Marshmallow.
Is there anything that you can do to help control the pain that they're experiencing for the first couple of days in their gangrene legs?
Now he asked about the pain in the gangrene legs the first couple of days, and that pain is horrible. You have to build a tent over the legs. You can't even stand and let the sheet touch the legs, which I have seen these cases time after time. Yes, within a very short time after you soak the marshmallow tea into the legs, the pain starts to leave. And where it will last for days under the regular condition and get worse, with this marshmallow soaking, one day from morning to night, you can put fomentations on at night. It gets that good, yes.
Could you also give some of the anodyne herbs to help that?
Or you could put any additives to it, yes, you wish. It will do it on its own, though.
What causes gangrene?
Well, gangrene is death. When the circulation is so bad that it's not getting the good blood to pump off the poisons accumulate and death sets in. And so whenever you have a gangrenous condition, you have death coming in. We've seen case after case where at first they were going to cut a toe off, and then they figured, well, it's not time, we got to cut the leg, we got to cut on up. But I'll tell you one more that we'll close off on. I was called up into the hills there in Utah. A couple of young ladies, young women, wanted me to see if I could help their dad. This man was 98 years old, and they had brought him back from the hospital to die. He had bed wounds on his back, down his spine, that had been on there for months. Bed sores, continually running. It was awful. And he had gangrene in both feet and both ankles. And at 98, they weren't going to cut his legs off because they knew it would kill him. He might as well die without getting him cut off. But the pain was so bad, he demanded to go home with his daughters. So they took him out there in the ambulance. And when they called me in, this old gentleman was 6'6". They had built a special bed for him. And he was in a coma. And one of the girls said, Daddy, he said, here's a man that we've brought that will help you. And he just grunted. He didn't know what the girl was talking about, I don't think. So I told him what to do. And they had plenty of marshmallow in the yard. And I said, get at it. It's your job to do. It's a do-it-yourself kit. And that's all there is to it. And I gave them the instructions. They went to work on it. They asked me if I would see them the next day or two, and I said no. I'll be back in the area teaching here in about 10 days. And I'll come in on a house call then, which I did. And when I went in, this man who had been in the hospital for so many, many months and had been suffering with the bed sores and now the gangrene, when they had me come in the front door, there stood a man 6'6" in the middle of the floor, hands back of him, I'm like this, and standing straight. His back was to me. And the young lady said, the middle-aged woman said, Dad, I want you to meet this man. And he turned around, and he looked down at me, and I looked up at him. And she said, this is the man that came in and told us the herbs to give you that saved your life. You see, we had them put slippery elm down the spine and heal the bed sores. And then we had the marshmallow. The marshmallow root will do the same thing, but the slippery elm was faster in this particular case. And she said, now you're well. And we thought maybe you'd like to thank Dr. Christopher. And he looked down at me, and he said, damn you. Oh, that's gratitude. Well, I was shocked. And I looked up and I said, what do you mean? And he said, I laid in that hospital and suffered for months with bed sores. Now the gangrene. So yes, I'm healed. But if I get back in that condition, they'll take me back to that blankety-blank hospital. And I'll go back into that same trouble again. I wish you hadn't saved me. He said, I am well, I'm healthy. But he said, I'm not going to stay around a place like this. I'll be dead in 2 days. In 2 days he was dead. Yes, his time had come. It was just good timing.
I was taking care of a man who was in his upper 90s, and he developed a really bad bed sore, and I was the only one working there that wasn't a nurse, and they were treating it with all the drugs and things, and he wasn't really responding. And I said to his daughter, you know, there are herbs that could help that, and she didn't want to hear it. She was a university professor, and she knew better. So I was on the night shift, and I couldn't stand it one night. He was in such pain, and I went out, and I couldn't get marshmallow, but I dug up hollyhock.
Mm-hmm. It's a cousin.
And I just put that on the bed sore all night, and then by the morning it was much better. His daughter came in, she said, well, you've been putting that good ointment on the doctor. And I couldn't tell her it was herbs because she would have thrown me out. But that healed it overnight. It just healed that sore up.
You like that? I think it's great. Yes.
What if marshmallow isn't available out in the yard and so forth? Would the dry herb work as well?
Oh, yes, you can use the dry herb, or as we say, you can use hollyhock. Now, hollyhock is the same family as your marshmallow. And the one reason I've never used hollyhock in my practice, they're so pretty. So we've always used the marshmallow.
Do you know of any other substitutes for marshmallow?
Oh, yes, slippery elm.
Slippery elm.
Surely. Oh, right, while we're on it, slippery elm happens to be one of our items here, and we might as well talk on that. Slippery elm, you'll have to be awfully careful because the FDA says it's dangerous for the use of mankind.
Oh.
Yes. They have taken our most precious herbs and put warnings on them. And I get a little nauseated sometimes because it is so asinine and ridiculous. They did find one item in slippery elm that could be or could not be dangerous to the mankind. But they didn't realize that herbs in their wholesome state, the balance of the herb acts as a catalyst and does the job and makes that one item that might be questionable, unquestionable, and perfect. The whole thing is so simple, and yet when we try to complicate it, we miss the boat.
But Dr. Christopher,
Yes.
you can win babies on a slippery elm, right? I mean, you
Oh, slippery elm and marshmallow root is the same thing. You can fatten a child up, a baby, on slippery elm tea. You can do the same on slippery elm, but on marshmallow, on marshmallow tea. You can take a baby that's underweight and the mother is not being able to assimilate and give the milk in a rich condition, and you can fatten that baby up and make it a husky one on marshmallow root tea. But with slippery elm, I got to tell you a story here, and I think it'll answer a lot of things on it. I was practicing over in Evanston, Wyoming, and I got a call from over on the Utah side. A wealthy rancher over there told me what the problem was and asked me if I could make a house call. And I said yes. It was 30, 40 miles over. And so I headed over there. I packed my bag, and when I went into the it was a mansion, and in the middle of the living room, they'd taken most of the furniture and pushed it to one side, and there was a hospital bed. And in the hospital bed laid a boy about 8 years old. And he had the most beautiful face I have ever seen on a human. It was angelic. It was absolutely beautiful. It was a hot day, and he threw the sheet off down a ways because it was so hot. And from his neck down was a skeleton of bone covered with skin. He had been sent home from the hospital to die because he had dehydrated. He could not assimilate food. He had starved, suffering malnutrition and dehydration. He was nothing but a skeleton. They would give him a teaspoonful of water and he would throw it up. He couldn't hold it. There was nothing that he could handle. You know, I walked into that room and I looked at that little guy in the hospital bed, and my heart went out to him. And you know, he looked up and saw me. He'd been waiting for me. And he smiled and he said, "Good morning, doctor. Isn't it a beautiful morning? I'm glad to see you. How are you?" And how in the world could I say anything but fine? Oh, that little guy. He was an intellectual giant. He was of the Aquarian age. He was there for a purpose, a special purpose I knew. I looked down at him and he said, "Well," he said, "it's sure good to have you here." And I said to the father, "Could I examine him?" And carefully they rolled him, and his spine protruded in 3 places, bed sores. The bone was sticking out. The hip bone was sticking out through the flesh. Bed sores, but the bone was protruding out. And he said, "I'm fine." Huh. I just thought, boy, cut my tongue off if I ever complain again after seeing this little guy. Well, immediately I told him to have hot water and everything ready there, and we had to make up first some slippery elm gruel. Now your slippery elm has to be made into a gruel a little different from almost anything else, because you can't stir powdered slippery elm into liquid because it floats. You have to take the slippery elm, put some liquid in it, and make it a paste. And when you make it to a paste, then you can thin the paste down. And when the paste gets thinned down to the consistency you want, then you can use it. So we had them mix it down, the very first thing, so that it could be spooned. And when they had it ready for me, I propped this little guy up, and I'd give him a half a teaspoonful. And I remember he couldn't even take a teaspoon of water. He'd throw it up before. But he took a half a teaspoonful of slippery elm, and it went down, and he smacked his little lips. And he said, "That's good. Let me drink some." And I said, "No. No." In his condition, we had to give him a half a teaspoon at a time until finally we could gradually step it up a little to a teaspoon. And it took a long period of time, nearly an hour, to get the first cup down him, because it had to go down gradually. But he took it. Now here is a key on slippery elm bark and on marshmallow. You can give this to babies that cannot hold liquids, cannot assimilate or cannot tolerate anything. You can give it to old dying people or to the youth, and they will all be able to assimilate it and take it and hold it. And this little guy held the slippery elm gruel. And after we had about half a cup down him, they had gone on with the instructions I had told them to get ready, and that is they had taken the slippery elm and mixed it with water and made a paste of it, made a fomentation or a poultice of it, and it was a thick paste. And we rolled him over and put on his back, where all the way down the spine where the bones were sticking out and where the flesh was gone, the slippery elm in 3/4 of an inch to an inch thick. And the hip, we pulled the hip joint back in again, and we filled that with slippery elm paste. It took quite a bit, but we filled it all in with the paste and then rounded it over. Now over the hip we put wet towels, hot Turkish towels, and over the back we put wet towels to keep it moist, and rolled him back over again. Now the instructions were to check the back and the hip, and as this slippery elm is absorbed into the flesh, because it goes in and makes flesh, as it is absorbed into the flesh, add more. Don't dig into the old out, but just keep adding and adding. We gave them the incurables routine to follow for feeding, and using the slippery elm gruel and so forth right on through. And I left, and I told them that this was their do-it-yourself kit, and carry on, and I would come on house calls every week or so. And as I would travel over on those house calls, I saw a healing of healings. It was absolutely shattering. It was so terrific. And in a matter of a couple of months, that little skeleton had developed into a full-sized boy. Rounded out, perfect health, no scars. The spine, the hip, completely healed. It was terrific. Dr. Loretta Foote had knocked on the door, and Mrs. Hogle let her in. And Dr. Foote said, "Mrs. Hogle, you look like you lost your last friend." Mrs. Hogle says, "I think I have. Doctors say that I've got terminal cancer." And I'll have to give the expression that Dr. Foote used. I'd heard her use it many times. "Oh, pshaw." That was her expression. She said, "Look, I'll bring you some things here, and we'll see that cancer's cleared up." Oh, such a statement. She's crazy as I am. But, you know, the next morning, she came with a great big shopping bag full of carrots and a knuckle scraper, grater. Yes, excuse me. A grater. And she grated those carrots one by one and took the gratings and put them into muslin cloth and wrung them out, squeezed the juice out, and kept squeezing until she could do from a pint to a quart a day. And this was the year BC, that's before juicers, before carrot juicers. But they weren't invented at this time. And she did this by hand. And Mrs. Hogle began to get better after a period of time. And she went back to her Salt Lake doctor, and he said, I can't find any trace of the cancer. Looks like it's cleared up. Mr. Hogle says, no fifth-rate doctor tells us anything. He puts her on a train, and she heads back for Mayo's, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they all said the same, no cancer. She was so excited and so happy